Hi, my name is Shipra and I write for IndieWire. And I want to thank you guys all for coming out tonight. We are very honored to have a really talented group of filmmakers here tonight from the Wannabe. So if they can come out and we can introduce them to you. Vincent Piazza, star and producer. Director Nick Sandow, actor Michael Imperioli, producer Michael Gasparro, and producer Lizzie Nastro. For the audience, I don't know whether you guys have seen the film yet, but it's a really, really interesting story that, I've spent a lot of time on Wikipedia reading about mobs, but never came across this really fascinating story about a couple played by Vincent and Patricia Arquette, who are sort of in the middle of the whole John Gotti case, and they're trying to live out their dreams and in the early 90s, and in doing so, they end up sort of crossing paths with the mob in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So I wanted to start off by asking, because I know you guys worked on the script together.
Yeah.
So what brought you two together in the first place?
It was, I said this earlier, but it was really a huge case of synchronicity. Mike Gasparro, who's also Nick's manager, had contacted my agent to do a reading of the screenplay at that point when it was in an early stage of development and to be made by another group. And I read it. And we hit it off at the table read, and I wished him luck with it. And then a few months later, he was cast on Boardwalk, and we're in a scene together. So that felt really good. And then we kept talking about it, and we decided to kind of embark on this thing together. And as we got into the nitty-gritty with the script, these pieces just kept coming together, and we all started getting involved. And Lizzie had a wonderful idea of going out to Patricia Arquette with it, who's also with Gersh, the same agency I'm with. And I don't know, just piece by piece, it all came together that way.
Mm-hmm. And just to back up a little bit, Nick, how did you come upon the story?
Yeah, a friend of mine gave me a bunch of newspaper articles. It was about 5 or 6 different articles, I think in like 2000 or 2001, about a real couple who went around and some of the same events took place. This is based on a real couple. And it had like half a dozen, facts in it that I was just fascinated with. And I started to piece together a narrative and I jumped in and said, okay, how do two people get together, and how are they capable of doing this? And started working that out and writing it, and then I put it down for a long time, and then about 4 years ago, I was like, I'm going to finish it, and I picked it up and I gave it to Mike Gasparro, and I said, I don't know what to do with it, and he was like, I love this. I think let's try and get it made. Well, maybe we can sell it, maybe we'll get it made, and we weren't sure, and that was sort of the beginning of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were on Boardwalk together, and then and then Michael has done a lot in sort of contributing to like the growth of the gangster genre over the course of the past 25 years or so. So I'm curious what it was like approaching it from like a little bit of a different angle, not necessarily in the same sort of like myth making that, say, Goodfellas does, or The Sopranos.
That was the attraction to me. It was, I'm an actor for 25 years. I'm from the Bronx, so when I started working early on, that's all they wanted me to play was mobsters and bad guys, and I got real tired with it, real quick, and so when I wanted to jump back into the genre, I knew I wanted to do it from a different angle. And you know, growing up in that world, I always saw it very differently. And myself was always attracted to the outsider, or somebody who's sort of on the outside looking in. And I fell in love with this idea of this man who, you know, is just desperately wanting to be something he's not. And I related to that really deep down. So.
And Michael, you, how did you get involved with the project? How did you get brought in?
Nick and I have been friends for, I don't know, a long time, 20-something years. Yeah. We've done a lot of movies together and theater. We've acted together. We've directed each other in plays and movies, and so.
So was it strange for you to play a character that was not in the mob?
No. Most of the characters I played were not in the mob, just the ones that are roles that are most notorious are, but no, not at all. No, not strange.
So what attracted you the most to that particular character? Because we don't see him as much, but he's very much present throughout.
Yeah. It was a very real relationship, you know, and it's complex in that he doesn't want to be an enabler. He wants to help, but yet he, you know, he's tried and it's a little bit too much trouble, and he's worried about his own security and his own family, and it's a lot of mixed feelings. There's compassion, there's sympathy, but there's also a little bit of, you know, they're brothers. There's a competitive thing, a Cain and Abel thing that kind of, yeah, he proved himself a fuck up once again, you know, that kind of thing, and he's almost, you know, family things are complicated. They always are, and Nick wrote that very truthfully. Made it very interesting and fun to play.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't seen the film yet, Michael and Vincent play brothers. We can actually take a look at a clip right now that sort of can give you an idea of the dynamics between their characters. So, I mean, we've seen, you know, like in The Godfather and such, like scenes between, you know, someone in a family who is in the mob and someone who is not, or, you know, in this case, fascinated by it. And Michael, I'm really curious, you know, you've been acting for a really long time, and how do you think that, how do you think your relationship to the gangster genre has changed as a performer and both like a, you know, consumer over time? And Vincent, I'd also love to hear from you as well.
Well, I think the theme of the movie is really very modern. It's not, although it's a period piece from, 24 years ago, the psychology of it, which to me it's really about, is modern because of The Sopranos and because of all these movies, and you know, like the idea that people would watch The Sopranos and idolize my character is very scary. You know? I mean, to me, you know, if you idolize that person, something's wrong with you. You know, he's a psychopath in a lot of ways. You know, his antisocial, psychopathic behavior. So that's kind of scary, and that's kind of true. That scene, there's a scene in the movie where a young Eric Roberts is approached by his character, and he starts calling him his name from Pope of Greenwich Village. What's his name in the movie? Paulie. He's calling him Paulie, and he kind of engages him, and it gets very uncomfortable. I've been in that scene, you know, where people called me Christopher or Spider or something, and it gets weird because they want to entertain that vibe, and so I don't think this movie would have been made when it really happened. It would just be a historical document that didn't contain the kind of complex psychology that Nick explored, which to me that's really what makes this different than, it's not a mob movie. It's a portrait of a disturbed person.
Yeah.
Well, when we started working on this, I was working on Boardwalk Empire, so I was immersed in the history of the mob and as it was in the 1920s, which was really, in my opinion, where the mythology began, because it was the first decade in history where they were perceived as good guys because they provided alcohol and things that people wanted. And so that's where I felt the lore began, and it carried on right up until, and Nick had really pinpointed this, 1992, the sentencing of John Gotti was the last mafia boss of that color, of that ilk, for generations. And what was interesting as we kept exploring it, 1992 was also where the lid blew off on the Sicilian mafia. They had detonated a bomb, blew up a judge and a district attorney in Sicily, and really outed themselves. So, you know, from across the ocean, it was imploding. So it was a really interesting time to explore.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, for a lot of people of my generation, I was really young when John Gotti got sentenced to go to prison. And so can you explain maybe, you know, the significance of that to, you know, like the cinematic culture around mobs as well as, you know?
Yeah, I think, you know, at that time we were sort of, especially New York at that time, you know, there was no Apple store on Prince Street. You know, it was a different New York, and we were at a crux, and the mob was eating themselves alive before John Gotti, you know, got sentenced. But he was it was the nail in the coffin for organized crime as we know it. So it was the end of an era. It was, and even in New York, I mean, it was the introduction. I mean, then came Giuliani, and now there's an Apple store on Prince Street. So it ushered in a new time, and that's the significance of that time and the mob at that time for me. It was sort of the end of something. And Thomas is desperately trying to hold on to something. I mean, just authentically trying to hold on to something that meant so much, especially in the movies. You know, you watch The Godfather, and man, I want to be in that family. You know, I just want to be protected, and I want, you know, I want that power, and I think he was earnestly after something that it was an idea of something, but also something that was over, because there was no more loyalty in those circles, and they were just eating themselves alive, and everybody was ratting everybody out. So,
but do you think it's sort of problematic to, at least in terms of, you know, the cultural psychology, the way that cinema influences the way people kind of like, you know, conduct themselves and model themselves after, you know, people that they see on screen, to show people, to sort of, you know, glamorize, I guess, like, you know, the mob. And I think a really good example, contemporary example is Mad Men, right? So showing like that. I mean, it's a critique of that period, but at the same time, it's also very much, you know, a celebration of it as well, like the aesthetic overall. So was that something like a concern for you, or?
I'm not sure of the question. I get what you're saying, but what was your question?
Were you trying to critique, you know, that?
No, I don't think I was trying to critique it. I think, you know, all these things we're talking about, I think I was trying to raise questions. I mean, that we were kept asking ourselves these same questions, and I think that's what I was after. You know, I was trying to explore this time and trying more to understand it. And I think it's less a critique, and like Mad Men, it's not that. You know, I think we live inside these characters a little more, and I don't think we are watching the time or the clothes or, you know, the cocktails at lunchtime or whatever, you know. At Met, you're doing it when you're watching Mad Men, you know, how that desk looks so beautiful. I don't think that's what you're doing here, and that's not what we were after, you know.
Yeah, I feel like it dives into the cliche and just questions it for what it is, not only at that period of time, but also, through cinema and what influence that had on the time. So it just, it explores the question.
And speaking of, living inside characters, what was it like living inside Thomas?
It was fun and disturbing all at the same time, because there's a certain, Nick had written him as this wiry character, and it was exciting to get into it because there's a freedom that people like this have. There's a certain filter that doesn't exist in customary social interactions. So he has no problem, invading people's space to get what he wants, and so there were parts of that were fun to explore. But then as it's really a descent, of what happens, and as it gets darker and darker as the film goes on, it was a great challenge, because some big questions are raised.
Mm-hmm. And question for the producers. Was the angle of the film, did it make it harder to get, people behind it, or to in terms of financially, or was it?
I think that Nick's script, from the start was strong, and people really responded to it. And so having people, when we were all ready to share it, people read it and sort of held on to a little bit, which was nice, because then as we rounded out more elements, like locking in Patricia, sort of all this was happening simultaneously. So all these elements kept coming together, and Vincent's point of it sort of had this crazy momentum, and people were really responding on all levels, whether it was on the financing side or actor wise, and producer, with Marty. So it was this really nice momentum that we had, and it resulted in actually being able to go and shoot the movie, when everything got put together. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was, I guess, for each of you, the most, interesting scene to film?
There were a few. One thing that I think we should point out is Patricia to work with, and what a catalyst she was in terms of the story, because Thomas, for who he is as a standalone character, didn't have access to this world, and I guess the moment of conception, meeting Patricia's character really set it in motion, because she, in a sense, had access. She was a bit more savvy and allowed the story to unfold. So working with Patricia was an absolute gift. An incredibly generous actor, and there were scenes that we worked on that were fun. There was a scene where we're with Eric Roberts at a social club. I don't want to give too much away, but that was a wild, fun scene to shoot. And another one was with an actor, Vincenzo Amato, who plays one of the heavies in the film. And this is toward the end, and really gets into the, I guess, the umbilical cord of what Thomas was after. That was a really intense but yet fun, energizing scene to shoot.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Nick, as a director and an actor, sort of working on those?
Yeah, I really love I love working with actors. So I love the contained spaces. Of course, the Flora scene, the scenes with Michael, and we were contained and we were in that space, and you really get to see what actors can do, and when you're not trying to pull off a block party or a death scene, and you don't have any time, and you have 70 extras, and so I love all those scenes that were contained. I love the espresso scene with Vincenzo and Vincent. I love that scene. Watching what these guys can do, it's just so. I mean, for me, that's the high. It's being able. I love working with actors, so just giving them the freedom to explore, and then sort of just maybe steer a little bit and sort of encourage a little bit, and get in there and talk and laugh together, and laugh at what we just did, and. So the intimate stuff. I love the intimate stuff. The stuff with John Ventimiglia, the stuff that when you first get a job. Yeah. It's wonderful. I mean, the stuff that's improvised in that scene, at the top of that scene, between Vincent and Johnny V. they're just hysterical. It's like you couldn't write that. Stuff wasn't in the script. You couldn't write that stuff.
And it was fun when Michael and I got to work together in The Florist. We were working in, 30 locations in 20 days. So, you start to lose track. It's like a fever dream, the whole thing. And we'd go from like a robbery or some real heavy gangster stuff, and then we go to The Florist. And Michael had this incredible way to ground my character. So, he's off the handle, and then suddenly there's this history, there's this relationship that you brought to it so beautifully that it just was this anchor for him. It felt like, in many ways, for me, approaching Thomas, it gave me permission to shoot further in other scenes because you were there grounding it from a family standpoint. It was really great.
Thanks. Thank you, Vincent.
So, you mentioned, the scene with the block party, which is amazing. The color palette is just so rich, and that persists throughout. So, and it really gives you a sense of like you're in that time period, which is really hard to recreate because people are going to scrutinize it a lot because they've seen it, because it's not that far in the past. How did you do that?
Well, look, I think first we had a couple of months to play with. Of course, we had a wardrobe. Kiara Wells was our wardrobe designer. That's an element where we can show the time. Brett Pollack, our DP, he's the guy who created that palette and really went for it. And location. We went out to Brooklyn and Queens, and Vincent's from Queens, so we had spots that were you can still find old New York. You can still find the 90s here, and the locations were really, I think, the things that saved us. And we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of time, so you got to keep everything small. We had to keep everything tight. We couldn't get too big. With the block party, we could open it up. That was our day. We could open it up and sort of create a bigger palette. The rest of the time, you got to keep it small. There's, you only have 2 period cars, so like, don't move past there. It's like,
We had 6.
Don't move.
We had 6 actually.
It felt like we had 2.
It was funny too watching Nick kind of keep it together because they kept letting traffic through. So all these modern cars are going through, and the second they go, the light would turn, barricades go up, and go, and everyone's kind of going to the street. And block
It was
party
also like 30 degrees that day too.
It was 30 degrees, and the police. There's always like a policeman in charge of the set, and that day he decided that we were shooting a block party. He decided that we couldn't block the street, that we had to run traffic. This wasn't Prince Street we were blocking. It was like 48th Street in Bay Ridge. It meant absolutely nothing to anyone if we blocked that street. And he said, no, every time you call cut, you got to run cars through. I had 60 extras. I was pulling my hair out of my head. And eventually, what I did, I stopped calling cut. I just said, we won't. Let's just keep going. And I just stopped calling cut so he can stand there and hold traffic. And
Occasionally he would be like, is that scene still going on? We're like, yep, still going on.
Still going on.
And we went into night. We went into night.
And we ran
and we
into
had to
night.
hire the sausage truck for like 2 more hours for like $500.
Exactly. We ran into night that
So
night.
that's how the transition, because it goes.
The transition, it was
wasn't
all supposed to be one day. So I had to have that night. I had to make that
So
night.
you just kept running the camera, pretty much.
We were like,
And Brett was amazing, our DP. He kept the camera rolling. It's digital, so we didn't have the problems on Boardwalk. We're shooting on 35. He's just flying around, so the cars are coming through, and I'm like, come on, let's go. And he's staying with me, and we're just walking down the street getting.
yeah.
It was a nightmare for Nick in the edit, I'm sure, with all the scrap footage of us just walking around. But we got a lot of interesting
Great
things.
stuff, yeah.
And then earlier you also mentioned improv. So was that like a really big component of shooting?
Yeah, I think that the actors knew where we had to go. They knew what needed to happen. They knew the beginning of the scene, the middle of the scene. They knew the end of the scene. What they said to me I just was like, let's go for it. Where they moved, where they,
It felt
And-
like a living document, like
Yeah.
the script, because we'd show up and the maybe location is slightly different than as written. So, the actors and all of us would just deal with it and address it and find stuff to do with it. So it was a lot of fun, and that speaks to Nick's direction because he just gave us so much permission to do that on set. It's great.
So, I mean, this was a lot of sort of adapting to your environment, but you've all worked on like very, very, big budget professional sets that are, like have, all the catering that you can imagine.
We had good catering, actually.
So, is there one that you prefer, or are there like advantages to one versus the other? I mean, because obviously great products come out of both.
The movie we did before that Nick produced, we shot in his house. that we improv the whole movie.
Yeah,
we
movie
shot in
called
your
Houses,
house.
yeah.
We shot it for about $5, or something like that. I mean, that was like the lowest, but I mean, that's really low budget movie.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love this.
And-
I love, you have a digital camera now. You don't need a lot. I mean, you don't need it. And the bigger it gets, the harder it gets. I like to keep it intimate and keep it small. So yeah, that doesn't mean I wouldn't take a lot of money for something to do big. But yeah, I like it small. I like to keep it intimate.
And what about for you? I mean, coming off of Boardwalk,
Well, it was, there are pros and cons, but for this, it was incredibly liberating to, stretch a character out working so quickly. TV, because of its nature, you have to honor the script in such a way because you have a certain amount of days to make, and then there's another episode. So, there's a wonderful progress to it. But with indie film, obviously there's a short amount of time as well, but a lot more permission to, just dive in and also accept the challenges as like blessings. You have to look at it that way. So whenever we're tied down by something that wasn't planned, you got to deal with it. And then how do we deal with it in the context of the story? And that was fun because it made it a lot more adventurous to do.
yeah. So I think we have to move to the fun part, Q&A.
So do you see this film as sort of debunking the mob as much as it is also trying to just tell a story? And also, I guess because you guys are both actors and also both on both sides of the camera, does that offer a refreshing quality to the whole process of filmmaking for you as an individual as well as, craft-wise?
I'm not exactly clear on the second part of your question.
In other words, when you're doing both, a little bit, in front of the camera, a little bit behind the camera, does that reinvigorate the process, or sort of does it allow for a new kind of feedback process that sort of stimulates
I
you
think
guys
so.
as actors and behind the camera? And then, do you see this as debunking the mob as much as it is telling just a straight story?
I don't think we were after any kind of debunking. I think it. I know all. Michael, myself, and Vincent. We were all from places. We grew up in places where these characters were very real to us and very close to us, and so I think we were just after some level of truth that seemed right. There was nothing a matter of debunking, but I do think that. We were also trying to be sure to look further, further. And I think emotionally we were trying to do that. Because, you see these characters in films and you see people hurt people in films and, they're really cool at doing it. And I wondered, well, what is it when you hurt somebody? Can't you feel bad? And don't sometimes people feel bad when they hurt somebody? And I think they do, and that's we kept trying to put our finger on the emotional point of it. And as far as the acting and the directing, I think they feed off each other. I love doing both of them. Yeah.
Well, in this movie, it's because Nick and I have done so much together. It's a whole other level of that. When you work with someone we've taught together. directed each other, acted together. I mean, we've that. So there's a shorthand. There's a common aesthetic in some ways, and all those things. So that's a whole other level. But yeah, I think acting informs your directing, and vice versa, no doubt. Yeah.
Thanks. I saw the movie last night and it was phenomenal. My question's for Vincent. Thomas is such a colorful and intense character. What did you do to get in that mindset? Do you have anything in common with him?
Well, I was really, really lucky in a way because of the process, which I was really introduced to through Nick, of exploring the script in such an intimate way. For I guess a year and a half, maybe 2 years leading up to the shoot, that I was coming off of Jersey Boys, and I had about 2 weeks to dive into this, and it was a major test of faith to go, if I don't know it by now, I'm never going to know it. So I had 2 weeks to deal with more aesthetic qualities, but getting to the color of it, I think through our conversation and movie swapping and such a wonderful collaboration throughout, it just kept accumulating all this information, this knowledge, and again through the research, of course, with Boardwalk and spending 5 years in that, or at that point maybe 3.5 years in that. It was it all kind of conspired to give some freedom and for that challenge.
Since it was based on the true story, were there any challenges to portray in the movie all the details, like it was for real?
Yeah, no, there was no challenges. I didn't. Yeah, no, we weren't sticking to a script. There were some facts that I really enjoyed in a few newspaper articles, and then I built a narrative around that, and I used my imagination, and that was fun. And so we didn't have to stick to, Vincent played Lucky Luciano. I mean, he's playing a real character, and on Boardwalk, and there's certain constraints to that, and we didn't have any of that. Yeah.
Hi. Do you think that because, you were talking before about, how it's so strange that people could sympathize with a psychopath or something like that. You can't even understand why someone would do that. But do you think
sympathize, I understand. I mean, admire and aspire to and look up to. Sympathize, that's okay.
Do you think it's because do you think that the reason why these films or these shows or this movie right now, that people want to see other people also with flaws, even if it's, they're doing things, killing people or it's with a mob or whatever, there's some sort of relation, even if it's minute, it doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme, and that,
That's drama.
Everybody wants...
The first play, Oedipus, is a guy who kills his father and marries his mother. You could put that on TV right now and people will be tuning in, That's exciting. That's juicy and it's controversial and disturbed, but that's drama. It's more, when you send it out into the world, the question is how much responsibility you have for what you're putting out there, but then you get into areas of censorship. Should you not be allowed to make a gangster movie because some people are going to admire that character and want to be that character? But did they want to be Oedipus, and did they kill their father and, sleep with their mother back then? I don't know, Maybe.
Yes.
The Wannabe in ancient Greece. That's the next movie.
That's the next one.
How long did it take in post-production? Because, I know it was low budget and everything. I'm in the process of it, and I'm just stressed out. I filmed a film for a year and a half because we had no money, and I just, now everyone's asking what's going on with it, and we happen to get Eric Roberts for it because of Pope, and now it's at one point everyone was excited. Now everyone's hounding us. When's the movie going to be out? You're letting it go idle, and it's just 3 guys really in my friend's apartment in Brooklyn editing. So I just wanted to know how long did it take you guys?
Mike, Lizzie, can you help
It's
me? I don't
3
remember.
years, I think it was.
No,
6 months.
probably
6 months.
6 months in the edit, more. I don't know.
Yeah.
We had
We had some
time off. We had some gaps. Some time gaps.
And we also had to get notes from Scorsese, so the time getting some stuff and back and forth. So we had some lulls that was.
We had some downtime,
And our other partners who were great and worked with us throughout. And well, you always want to get something out. Probably we all felt this. We always wanted to show it. We want to show it, but
You don't want to rush it.
our partners collectively were great partners and worked with us through that process to get where we finished. It's just about really focusing on the film, I guess. Nick, you can answer better, but just focusing on the film, getting it done.
Getting it out when it's ready to
Yeah.
you, not your friends or
Yeah.
anybody else, because it's your work that you're putting into it.
I'm a huge fan of Mob Wives. So
Who isn't?
I love Karen. My question is, did you guys get any flack or anything from the families of the characters you were portraying through the movie?
Not as of yet.
Just came out, so we're looking forward to any
give it
kind
time.
of publicity we can get.
I have a feeling I'm going to get some calls from some mob wives. I don't know why, but I have a feeling.
Only to go on dates, though.
No, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, this question's for Nick. Can you talk about your writing process?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Writing is hard, man. You're in a room alone by yourself, and nobody applauds or, it's hard. I was fascinated with some of the elements of this story, and I tried to personalize it as much as I could, and get underneath and ask myself a lot of the questions, the questions of identity, and then play out, and it becomes a joy, because then you're just flying and making stuff up, and you're king for the day because you have these characters in your imagination and you live with them and they start to become a part of you, and it then becomes really lovely because everything starts to make sense and everything in your life starts to inform what you're writing, and then you start to share it, and that process is great. I remember I sent Michael a draft early on, and you get these great notes, and you write a screenplay, and there should be 40 names on that screenplay. There's 40 people gave me incredible notes and incredible ideas, and you're just sort of like a kid and like, oh great, so that's my process.
Well, thank you so much for coming out, and let's thank the filmmakers. And the film premiered last night, and you can still check it out during Tribeca, which is running through next weekend.
That's right.
Cool.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Hey,
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.